Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee meeting today, the 20th of September. Item 1, introductions and membership of committee. There are no apologies this time. Could I ask each panel member to introduce themselves, please?
Councillor Andrew Cooper. I'm the Chair of the Environment and Climate Change Scrutiny Panel.
Councillor Jo Lawson, Chair of Health and Adult Social Care.
Councillor Zarina Amin, Chair of Growth and Regeneration.
Councillor Itrat Ali, Chair of Children's Services.
Thank you very much. Item 2, minutes of the meeting on the 22nd of May and 2nd of August 2024. These are submitted for approval as a correct record. Do I have a mover?
I'll move the minutes.
Happy to second.
And seconded?
Happy to second them.
And a show of hands, please. Thank you. So, further to its consideration at the last meeting of the committee, the Inclusion and Diversity Strategy 24-27 was approved by Cabinet on the 10th of September 24. The committee's comments on the draft and the amendments made in the response to those comments were detailed within the relevant Cabinet report. Item 3, interest. Do any member have any interest to disclose? No. Item 4, admission of the public. This is a meeting open to the public and is being webcast live. The recording will also be able to view after the meeting on the Council's website. All items will be considered in the public session. Item 5, deputations and petitions. We don't have any deputations or petitions that have been received. Item 6, public question time. No questions have been received. Item 7, Leader of the Council and Corporate and Finance portfolio holders are here to set out their priorities. So I'd like to welcome Councillor Patterson, Councillor Turner, Councillor Hawkins to the meeting today. And we'd like to start with Councillor Patterson, Leader of the Council.
Because I've got that one. Shall I start without the slides and hope? All right. Okay, right. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity to put the new administration's priorities to you today. Next slide, please. When I say new administration, we are a new administration since July, so we haven't had a lot of time to think about our priorities. And of course, many priorities just don't change. And certainly our long-term vision, our shared outcomes, and the the four strategies, the four partnership strategies that the Council has relied on or worked within for quite some time now, that still continues. So, I mean, our vision is still for a district that combines a strong, sustainable economy with a great quality of life, leading to thriving communities, growing businesses, high prosperity and low inequality, where people can enjoy better health throughout their lives. That's our vision. It's not easily achievable, is it? As we all know, especially in these days. But it still rings true. And so do the 8 outcomes that we all share with our partners. We're well versed in those. And as I say, our strategies that we work with our partners, we've just reviewed and passed at Council last week our environmental strategy. We've also recently updated our inclusive economy strategy, and inclusive communities framework. So all of that is not really changing. And these are the 24-25 council plan priorities, which were set in sort of March, April this year. And of course, we're still working to those. Our budget that was set in March this year was predicated on those 4 council plan priorities, and those are not going to change. But just for completeness, we will continue to deliver and address our financial position in a fair and balanced way, strive to transform council services to become more efficient, effective and modern, continue to deliver a greener, healthier Kirklees and address the challenges of climate change, and continue to invest and regenerate our towns and villages to support our diverse places. I mean, those are the overall priorities that were set earlier this year. As I say, that, again, those don't really change. Again, the wording might change slightly, but we still work within or to those priorities. And what have we done so far? Well, just in a couple of months, or even we've had a few successes in terms of our children's lives. We've recently had a very good Ofsted outcome, which shows that our children's services has really improved over recent years, and we are providing a better start in life for our children. We are definitely, I think, as you walked into the town hall, you might well have seen, pushing forward growth across Kirklees. There is the cultural heart. I mean, the demolition of the piazza has now started, and myself and Graham were there just yesterday to see progress made on that. Dewsbury Town and Riverside, again, if you go on the train to Leeds, which unfortunately I've had to do, well, unfortunately I have to go, I go into a lot of Wicker meetings these days, and I constantly go past that development at Dewsbury Town and Riverside, and or Riverside, and that is definitely coming along as well. And then, of course, we're all well aware of the Transpennine rail upgrade and how that's affecting us, and how that is going to be such an important investment into our area, and how we will all benefit from that in a few years. We have already, excuse me, established some cross-party working arrangements, which has been established certainly for budget setting, but we are working far more closely with the opposition parties of the council than we have done before. So those are a few of the successes so far. So new areas of focus for 24-25. We do need to look at those priorities that we had already, and I think develop those a bit more substantially. I mean, talking about the modern organisation, we do need to get the basics right. I'm sure everyone in this room who's a member or an officer will be well aware of the number of times it seems that the council doesn't get things right. And as far as our residents are concerned, we want to meet their expectations as much as we can and are able. Being a responsible organisation that protects the vulnerable and drives sustainability, that can never go away, can it? I mean, just protecting life and limb, be it because of climate change or because of children that need to come into our care for one reason or another, we have to be that responsible organisation. Working with our partners has become more important than ever. Whilst we can't do anything or anything alone these days, we have to make sure we work with our partners to thrive, including good local health services, education opportunities and housing. All of those very basic, again, health, education and housing are so important, and I really feel that we need to lift our recognition of those services that we do provide in partnership to the forefront a bit more. And then underpinning all of that, I think, is driving local economic growth. And I've put there, especially through the cultural sector, we've got a cultural heart coming, and I really want to make sure that the culture in that cultural heart is there and stays there, and we make the most of not just the buildings that will be the new library, the new art gallery, the new museum. We need to make sure that there are links between that cultural heart and all our other wealth of assets that we have right across Kirklees, be it Oakwell Hall or the Peak District. There's so many wonderful things that we've got here in Kirklees, and we don't shout enough about them, I think. And then, of course, we have the opportunity, I think, and we really must make the most of that, to work with our West Yorkshire Mayor, the new government, and our MPs in Kirklees. We really all need to be pulling in the same direction and working together, and we have that opportunity. So some specific priorities for 25, 26. Well, to be honest, they're being developed at the moment. We are working, as I've already said, to the existing priorities that were set earlier this year. And we want to set next year's priorities alongside our budget, or we want our budget to follow our priorities this year. So we're doing them in tandem, and we're being much more inclusive, I hope, than we have been previously in pulling both those priorities and the budget together. And we, as I've said already, we need to work right across the council and with our partners to work on the challenges that we face. We can't do it alone. And we really need to have a good scrutiny in helping to develop those. And that last point there, which I've already made, I think, but we will work with all levels of government, national and regional, to meet those challenges. Let's take advantage of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I think we'll take questions at the end, so I'll take all the presentations first, and then we'll have comments at the end. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Chair. You'll not be surprised in many ways that my priorities are exactly the same as being shared by Councillor Patterson, the leader of the council. From a slightly more manageable point of view, so I didn't bring any slides because I think you've got death by PowerPoint, because my colleagues both decided we've got loads of slides for you. So, obviously, main priority, and they're not probably going to be much different from last year, to be fair, and we're still working through the detail through the plan council later this year. So, because we've obviously had a break in continuity, shall we say. So, the priority at the moment is to deliver a balanced budget for next year, 25-26, and also working a longer-term financial plan for years going forward. As I pointed out on Wednesday at Council, the financial position of the Council is still challenging. The finances of the nation are still challenging. So there's a lot of work to do, but I'm confident that we will reach a balanced budget that meets our needs by March's meeting. What Councillor Patterson didn't mention was one of the things that's going to drive our economic plan is a local plan. So we're going to develop that as quickly as we can. Obviously, even though I say quickly, it's not a quick process by any stretch of imagination. Simply the amount of work and effort that goes into it, the amount of consultation, etc. that goes into it. So we are now open for sites. We're inviting people to submit sites for a local plan, and I had a conversation earlier this week. We've got some sites already coming forward, some interesting sites coming forward. So people are starting to come forward with sites, and we need sites for that, for not only for housing, we need industrial sites, because we need to grow the local economy. That means creating jobs, high-paid, high-skilled jobs if we can. So that's going to be take up a considerable amount of time to get the local plan moving forward. Also, we will continue to rationalise our assets. We have, unfortunately, too many buildings at the moment that's costing us too much money. So we'll continue that programme. That is not without its challenge, because my colleagues in corporate land are a bit understaffed, shall we say. So it's taken a little bit longer than perhaps we would have liked, but they are working really, really hard to do that. We have an auction coming up in October, I think it's the 15th, and then hopefully one in November to get rid of some of our assets that need disposing of. Some of these have been, and what did I describe them as? Some of these are my problem children from about 7 or 8 years ago, so hopefully by November some of my problem children will have passed into the private sector and be not a worry for us. So obviously we support in many ways the priorities set out by the leader. We will also continue to deliver the CapEx on programme on the investment in Kirklees, because I still believe we need to invest to create the economy and the jobs of the future, and that includes the Levelling Up Fund, which we still believe is, nobody's told us it's not going ahead, so we're pushing ahead with those. The investment zone from the station to stadium gateway continues to move ahead. We've, as I said, on Wednesday again, we have seen considerable interest in that site, and hopefully in the not too distant future some of the blockers to that will be removed, so that's looking really positive. And of course, again, working with partners, our partners at the university, the new building I believe is finished, ready for this year, and the phase 2 of the site is started as well, so that old Southgate site is now starting to develop, so that's a real positive. And like I say, it's investment across Kirklees. We've got the Dewsbury Blueprint moving forward. We've got the arcade group in Dewsbury redeveloping the arcade there, which is starting to look really nice. The town board with the money from government for the 20 million over 10 years, that's developing nicely. There's been a slight delay because the government said we didn't have to submit the plans by the target date they'd originally given us. So we're working on that, so it gives us a bit more time to come up with a plan, but that's developing as well. And as Councillor Patterson once again pointed out, we will work with our partners. That includes our MPs, includes people like the LJ and Sigoma and all those, and we will continue to lobby hard to government for a fair funding scheme going forward. It makes no sense that some local authorities that don't have the deprivation demands that we do receive significantly more money than we do through the council tax programme. So it needs a review, and we need a fair funding scheme. So hopefully, I don't expect miracles overnight because it's a complicated issue, but I would like to think that perhaps not for this year's budget, but for the next year's, for the year after, we will have a fair funding scheme, and we'll, as I always say, all we want is our fair share of the pie, and hopefully the government will deliver on that. But we will continue, as I said, to lobby government on all fronts to do that. We've already spoken to the MPs, so they've been sent back to express our concerns. So. And we've seen the household welfare provision extended, which is a real positive as well. So again, that was something we lobbied MPs on right from day one. So that's it, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for inviting me along to Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee to present my priorities for the corporate portfolio. I'll always appreciate the opportunity to talk about what I've been getting up to speed with over the past few months, and talk about the good work that has been happening in the corporate portfolio and where we're going in the future. I'm happy to take any questions at the end and outside of this meeting, and any engagement in the future I'd greatly appreciate too. Next slide, please. So for the next 5 minutes or so, I'll give a bit of a whistle-stop tour on the corporate services within the council and my portfolio, and I'll cover, there's 5 main areas I wanted to focus on. Support for the most vulnerable in Kirklees, modernising our council services, clear and transparent communication with our residents, enhancing our traded services, and championing our staff. Next slide, please. So first off is what I and many across the chamber as well are very passionate about, and that is supporting the most vulnerable in Kirklees. I want to start by praising the work of one of my predecessors in this role as well, the former councillor and now Member of Parliament for Colne Valley, Paul Davis. The political leadership he provided has meant that the support for the cost of living has been front and centre of council comms now for a number of years. The primary way we've been supporting the cost of living is the use of the Household Support Fund, which Councillor Turner touched on, which again I'm delighted to see that the new Labour government has pledged to continue. We have used this here in Kirklees to provide financial advice for those who are struggling to make ends meet, to provide funding for some of our partner organisations like the Welcome Centre and Uniform Exchange as a couple of examples. These partners have provided a lifeline for the most vulnerable, and as many of you will know, funding for them is very hand to mouth, and every bid, every pot of money they can tap into keeps them going and keeps them supporting residents. Ideally, I do want to, and I hope we will, live in a district where food banks are consigned to the history books, but whilst families depend on them, we do need to support the work they're doing as best we can. There are limits to what any one of us can do to support our residents, but by continuing this sort of partnership working, we're tightening the safety net to make sure we're reaching as many of our residents that need that helping hand as possible. Next slide, please. But I don't want to shy away from some of the challenges we're facing in the corporate portfolio as well, because like every service, there are very difficult budget pressures that we're under and require the council to think and deliver services a bit differently to how they have done in the past. How our residents access council services is the biggest area I think that we've seen change, particularly around our customer service centres. The support they will be receiving will be delivered at a more local level, so closer to the residents. But I have spoken to many of the residents who use customer service centres and the staff who used to work at the customer service centres. And I do want to take this opportunity as well to thank them for their commitment and passion for helping people. And that's the main area where I do want to reassure people. The most important thing is that when you are accessing services, you are meeting someone who cares and who's there to help. And that will continue with that. We're also seeing changes to how we provide post-16 home to school transport. Kirklees Council has spent £2.6 million on taxis and minibuses for transport post-16 students to their place of education. That's an average of £8,600 per student, and costs are continuing to rise as well. We must make post-16 transport financially sustainable, whilst also supporting the young people in their learning and helping them achieve their best outcomes. This process is happening in many neighbouring local authorities, which they're also going through these pressures, and we've got to ensure that the process, each individual case, is being considered on its merits while we deliver this change across the service. Next slide, please. So the next one is part of getting the basics right, which the leader was referring to, because the leader is right. We do need to shout more about the successes and what is going on across Kirklees. Headlines tend to paint a picture of doom and gloom, but we've got to talk up the work we're doing on things like the blueprint, on the investment that is going into our services, but also the challenges we're facing, and being open and honest about what we're expecting and set expectations accordingly. But it can't be all online either. Part of the council's business plan on comms included digital inclusion. Not all of our residents are on Facebook or Twitter, and many do struggle just to access the websites that we do have. I spent much of the pandemic in lockdown with an 82-year-old who was forced to go online, and it's a daunting prospect, and it is indeed frightening for many of our residents. That cannot be a barrier, though, to stop them from being able to access services, and that's something I'm really keen that we make sure we do break down that barrier. Next slide, please. The council also oversees the delivery of catering and cleaning services to schools and community facilities across the district. Another area where we are an award-winning council. We are reviewing some changes at the moment on this, but we're in a quite competitive market when it comes to traded services as the council. But I think we should praise the work, particularly on school catering that we do, that our children are receiving healthy and nutritious meals when they go to school, which is something many in the private sector don't deliver, whilst also providing a clean and tidy environment for them. Our markets come under our traded services as well. You might have seen the plans for Dewsbury and Huddersfield markets that have been in the news recently. When I described the Dewsbury market plans as being game-changing, I did truly mean that. Our markets are at the heart of our towns. Their success is intrinsically linked to the success of the town centres. We've got to crack on and deliver this investment, re-energise our towns, but make the most of that space as well for many generations to come. Next slide, please. And final area I want to touch on as well is championing our staff. So I frequently have said in sort of council meetings that without our staff we can achieve nothing for our residents. We stand up in this chamber, we give speeches, we go around, knock on doors, and we go to the community coffee mornings, but it's our staff who are emptying the bins, looking after our children and looking after our vulnerable adults as well. They do the bread and butter work that so many depend on. They make us the award-winning council that we are. We need them, and as such, Kirklees has to be a place for people to work, a good place for people to work. Despite all the challenges we're facing across the board, our staff are doing the very best and do go above and beyond. One area I feel we do lead the way on is our employee networks. So it's networks of staff supporting one another, meeting together, sharing their experiences and the challenges they face. I've met a number of these, and I really would encourage you guys as well, and everyone in the chamber to go along to the employer networks as well and reach out to them. It's something I've never seen in the private sector. I think it's really something we do really, really well in Kirklees, and something I'm very keen to keep supporting as well. We're also engaging with our trade union colleagues as well, who represent our staff. I know we've had proposals in budget meetings sometimes, which is about withdrawing financial support to our trade unions. No, they provide the support for our staff. They are their voice. We have a corporate joint consultative group where myself and senior leaders, senior management engage with our trade unions. We've had a number of informal meetings as well. I'm keen to see that relationship as strong as possible. Final slide, please. And just the last thing I wanted to put up is some of the pledges I was elected on back in 2022 in Dalton. As Councillor Ahmed will attest to, I measure every action and decision that I make as a ward councillor against those pledges, and will continue to do so in my tenure as a portfolio holder. Like all of you, I will stand up and be a voice for our residents. I hope this meeting demonstrates I'm more than happy and more than willing to be visible and accessible all year round. Part of the working we're talking about with our partners during the cost of living, hope that shows that we're keen to support them as well as our local community groups. Councillor Turner and Councillor Patterson have also touched on the investment that we need in our district, and we are going to work at every level to bang the drum for Kirklees as much as we can. And finally, ensuring that we meet our commitments on the climate as well. That's something that we want. Green spaces, clean air. We need to future-proof the council so that our residents can live long, happy lives, because we've seen some of the impact of climate change locally, some of the extreme weather we've seen over recent years, and that's also going on around the world. I think I went quite a bit over my 5 minutes, but thank you, Chair.
You did. Thank you very much. I appreciate you providing your priorities. If I can, before I open it up to members for questions, if I could just ask you, please, each of you, your main priority and the main challenge you think you'll face that isn't a budget restraint. Thank you.
Well, as far as excuse me, as far as the budget goes, it's the capital investment that we're making, and as I say, I really want to make sure that the cultural heart and the capital investment in there is secure and delivers for not just Huddersfield Town Centre, but for the whole of Kirklees.
Developing a budget for next year is clearly the most challenging part of my world, and not only that is looking at how we can try and perhaps look alternative provision to choke costs, try and divert some of the demand, because this is the demand that's the problem. It's a national problem, so we need to look at how we can reduce the cost of looking after our homeless people, and we absolutely must make sure that those homeless people have a roof over their head, but we also need to do that in an efficient way. So I think that's one of the things I'll be working carefully with closely with Councillor Moses on Crook on about how we can still provide that excellent service for people, although sometimes it's not that great, but provide a service for people, try and reduce that cost, because it's a challenge for us. And I don't know if anybody saw yesterday on the national news at lunchtime that this is a challenge for councils across the country, and it will tip several councils over the edge before the end of this year, I'm convinced. So how we deliver that service, but how can we do it more efficiently to meet that rising demand, because the demand is not going to go away, and at the moment it's looking like everybody is putting real budget pressures on us.
I'll be swifter this time, don't worry. It's in a similar vein to Councillor Patterson and Turner, but I think the changes to council services, particularly at what I was discussing about the access to the customer services and the home to school transport, because been engaging with a number of residents who are going through this process at the moment, it is really difficult for them. That can't make any bones about that. These aren't the decisions that any of us got into politics to be making. It's really, really tough. And these are the hard choices that are going to be coming back to this council chamber many, many times in the future.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Cooper?
I've got 3 questions. Residents' expectations, meeting those. It's always difficult to meet residents' expectations in the best of times. My experience as taking up casework is getting harder for us as councillors, therefore it must be much more difficult to get responses and to get action for householders out there if it's difficult for us as councillors. So that feels like it's going backwards. But I guess the question is how are we measuring if we are meeting residents' expectations? How are we measuring if we're going forwards, backwards, and where will that be reported? The home to school transport issue is a qualities issue to a large extent, particularly when it affects children who've got SEND issues that need addressing. And I wonder what flexibility is in the system to be able to accommodate that, because people will be appealing. And how are we going to be able to look at helping people who've got some really good cases, actually, and expensive good cases to deal with. So I'd like to know where flexibility lies and how that can be accommodated. And the third question, which is really a budget question, is what does the future bring? And it's in some ways it links with priorities. What if, in some form or other, permission to raise the council tax, or if money was provided from central government, if 10-20 million pounds additional was being provided for council funds, what would your priority be to use those 10-20 million pounds of additional funds? Would it be absorbed, or would it be used to protect certain services?
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Who was that question to?
I guess if it's that particular one is Councillor Turner. I guess the home to school transport is Tyler, and I guess the how do we measure our priorities is Councillor Patterson. So one each.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Patterson first.
How do we meet residents' expectations? Well, to a certain extent, we do have to. Sorry. Measure. Oh, well, you did also talk about meeting them in the first place, and measure, yes. I mean, you came back. I mean, it is about managing to a certain extent, but we have to be, certainly when it comes down to my own ward work, you have to be very honest about what is possible and what isn't possible, and to give as full of explanation as possible. That is, doesn't necessarily meet their expectations, but it helps to manage their expectations, and it lets them understand what is available, what isn't available in terms of any particular service, what can be done, etc. I mean, the responses you were talking about, I mean, that's part of, or the lack of response, I mean, that is part of getting the basics right. We really do need to be able to do that properly and quickly. People do know the answers, so we can get them out there. We do. We can do. It's all these small, almost bureaucratic things that could make life for our residents so much better, just by giving them the information, the understanding that they possibly need. In terms of measuring it, I mean, I don't think it is particularly going backwards, though, but obviously we want it to go forwards. And in terms of measuring it, we will be doing a click survey shortly. That's all Kirklees residents, and there'll be sort of satisfaction questions in that. There is, I mean, actually council inquiries themselves are actually monitored. I mean, how many potholes are reported, and all the different things that come through there, and all the various different consultations that there are. I mean, there's more and more. All of those measure customer expectations in one way or another. So we are measuring it, but in all sorts of different ways. And just, you might have intended this to be for Graham, but in terms of if we had an extra 10, 20 million, 100 million even, what would we do? There's just so many things that we could, well, 10 million would go nowhere really, would it? I mean, it could just go into reserves, as you say, be absorbed. No, we would want to make sure that anything like that would have the best impact that we could. It wouldn't just be absorbed, but what that was so difficult. Out of all the different priorities we've got, to be able to pick one, I think that would be really hard at this moment.
So, Carol's already alluded to what her thoughts are. If we got 20 mil, which would be really nice, but that would only keep us where we are. we know with a £30 million budget deficit next year, £30 million worth of savings to find, not a deficit, £30 million worth of savings. So if we got 20 mil, it would mean we'd only get to find £10 million worth of savings. So 20 mil would only keep us where we are if the genie came out of the bottle somehow and the government came to us with a bag load of money of a significant amount that allowed us to invest rather than stand still. There's a whole host of things you could spend it on, a whole host of things that would make significant differences to people's lives. We don't do enough anymore around health and well-being because we haven't got the money. Lots of early intervention, prevention things are not done anymore, and that's really important because I don't really saw the Prime Minister last night question why someone in, was it Barnsley, was 50, had a little 55 before they got serious health implications, and it was 8 years better off in Keir's constituency. So those health inequalities need addressing. The infrastructure is crumbling around us, so we'd have to probably have a big argument about how we spend that, but we do need some money spending on infrastructure. Again, SEND is a problem, so whilst we're doing 2 special schools, we can always look to improve that and invest more in SEND because it's really important for our young people. Youth services, excuse me, we wiped out many years ago virtually because of the cuts to an austerity programme, so some investment back in youth services. So some of this is about getting to what I would spend is getting to the grassroots, trying to improve people's lives and giving them a better outcome. And I'd like some money for housing, but the money for housing, to touch the sides, you're talking billions, because we really need billions of pounds of investment, not just in this authority, but billions in every authority, because we need to address this homeless problem. We need to get people back into homes, because from a family point of view, from a children's point of view, I believe everything stems from having a roof over your head. If you haven't got a roof over your head, where do you do your homework? If you haven't got a roof over your head, your health outcomes are worse. Your education outcomes are worse. All those things stem from having poor and not inequality in housing. And I would love to spend billions of pounds on housing, but that ain't going to happen, I'm afraid. But investment in the grassroots, really making a difference to people's lives, I think would be what I'd do if I got a sack of money. It's not going to happen, like, but...
Councillor Hopkins.
Yep. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question, Councillor Cooper. On flexibility, I sort of mentioned this in my presentation about each individual being taken on its own. There's an appeal process at the moment that many families are going through. I encourage them to go through that if they feel the decision is not right for them, and through that they can make their individual case to the council more clearly. But there is just the challenges facing the service. I hope sort of the figures that I gave show just how great a financial challenge this is for us. We do need to work differently and do things differently, whilst also making sure that we're not leaving our children behind. But as I say, we're not the first authority going through this process. I very much doubt we're going to be the last as well. But that appeals process is very much where I would encourage them to go.
Councillor Cooper, if you can be very brief for your supplementary, because we've got other members.
On the budget question and the additional funding, thank you. I got a list of the things that are being effectively cut, but what I didn't hear was what the priorities were. It's effectively, when the money, if money comes in, it's not keeping you where you are. You're going to have to make a decision about what you're not going to cut, or savings you're not going to make, whichever way you want to call it. So that was what I was trying to get to understand where that additional funding would come. I mean, some councils have been given, where in particularly dire financial circumstances, have been given permission to raise the council tax to a higher level than the usual 3% or whatever. So that was what I was trying to understand. I don't feel I've really got an answer to that question.
We're still in development of the budget, so until we get the figures back from each individual director, it'll be difficult to say what you would prop up this year. I mean, it's a hypothetical question, isn't it? Because we're not going to get it. And going back to your council tax question about should we, in effect, you're saying should we raise council tax more to fill the budget gaps, if you like. Well, if we were, I mean, and this is a personal opinion, and obviously this is you're asking this question now. And it would have to be a cabinet decision. If we were given position to raise council tax, my gut feeling is that is not the right thing to do at this moment in time. We've got a cost of living crisis. Asking those that's got very little and struggling to put food on the table and going to food banks to pay more would be seen inequitable, given the factors I've already said. Some councils have money coming out of their ears because of the way the council tax system. I wouldn't want to put the council tax up. That is almost supporting the fact and giving the support to a system that is flawed. And I wouldn't want to support a system that is clearly flawed and it's clearly in favour of rich local authorities, and the poorer northern authorities are the ones that are not getting their fair share of the cake, as I always tell you. All we want is our fair share. And that supporting a flawed system would seem to me to be the wrong thing to do, and it would not help our residents.
I agree, but that might be the only game in town, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Amin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues and members, for your in-depth presentation. I actually have a comment and a question for Councillor Hawkins. My comment is I do commend you for reaching out to the employee networks. I've previously been a chair of one of those networks, and the support to give them is quite invaluable. So just thanking you for that. The question is around access to services. You did highlight that in your presentation, and you've also highlighted that we have vulnerable residents who can't access the online system. Have you looked at how a way forward, so how you'd address that? I think from a ward councillor point of view, I think a lot of residents, when they do ring up on the Kirklees line, they're on hold for a long time. It gets frustrating. Sometimes they get cut off. So it would be good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Amin. And yes, it's something I think we've all had at some point or another from our residents, difficulty getting in touch with the council. It's something that's part of the digital inclusion business plan, that's in the council's business plan there, about how we tackle that. Something I think where we have seen this work quite well in recent consultations, particularly around the libraries. I've been at a couple of meetings there where officers went out and engaged with the residents that were going to be affected around there. You had that sort of direct contact. That's a very specific and niche example, I admit, but I think there is that getting that fine balance between those who can access and can get in touch with the council by phone and digitally do have that outlet, but also it's incumbent on, I kind of mentioned this as well at the last council meeting, incumbent on us as well to make sure we're signposting and helping them in our roles as best we can, whilst also working with officers to do that too.
Councillor Lawson.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the leader, the portfolio holder for finance and corporate for coming here today. Just a comment as such. It seems very much business as usual when it comes down to the actual priorities. It also is from what I'm taking away from this, it seems to be that the priorities are getting the basics right, looking at sort of maintaining people's health and well-being, and obviously working more closely with our employees here. When we actually talk about getting the basics right, we're not. Yes, we have to manage people's expectations. Most of my residents know that they are not going to get Blackmore Foot Road resurfaced. They know that they're not going to get that traffic calming scheme that they feel should be in place. But what they want is they want their bins emptying. They want the fly tipping removed. Not sort of weeks and weeks later while it actually builds up. If you'd have been down the Walpole throughout the whole of August, it looked like the council tip there. They also want overhanging vegetation cutting back. Their streets looking tidy basically and swept. Those to them, they cannot understand that, hang on, we know we can't have the big things, Joe, but come on, they must be able to do things like that. You also talk about sort of protecting the most vulnerable, looking at people's health and well-being. Dewsbury, the second biggest town in Kirklees, which also has one of the highest obesity rates, diabetes rates within sort of Yorkshire and probably nationally, doesn't have a sports centre. and is you have to look at, if you're going to look at people's health and well-being, for some people being able to go and swim, being able to do some kind of exercise, it's not just about getting fit, it's also helping their well-being. You also talked about the transport for post-16s and how it will be looked at on an individual basis. I'm sorry, I do not believe that it actually is. I have a resident who I've dealt with other things. She reached out to me because her daughter has obviously got SEND issues, and she was basically told you can have £200 a month to get her to a college that is outside of Wakefield. There would be no way that that young girl could get on a bus from the Balmoral estate into town, either a train to Wakefield and then another bus out. There is no way. So taxis, £200 is not going to touch the side for that young girl. And yeah, I asked, is her mum explained that when they were looking at colleges, they didn't just go, oh, this is nice. They went to places, went to Kirklees, they went to Calderdale, they went to a lot nearer places. Ideally, the mum would have loved her to have gone to Kirklees. But
Councillor Lawson, I understand it's a passionate point. Shouldn't we try and get a response to that?
yeah, okay, but what I'm saying is it's not done on an individual basis. I really don't believe, and I'm really also very pleased that you're also working with the trade unions. What I would ask was a question I put to Cabinet is back in sort of, I think probably, oh God, I can't remember exactly the month, but let's just put it there. Do the unions have sight of the Kirklees redundancy policy, which they have been asking for since the redundancies were first announced nearly a year ago? Thank you.
Councillor
I mean,
Patterson.
I'll just make a brief comment, but Tyler, perhaps you can come on. I mean, that's an awful lot of issues there, Joe, which you've brought up. They could all be priorities, absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to respond particularly to any one of them, I mean, because they are very specific things that you've raised. But what I would say, and I mean, I think we've all said it here, getting the basics right, housing, education, health, I mean, they do have to be our priorities. They absolutely do. And there's all sorts of different ways in which we can meet those priorities. And, you know, that's the challenge for us. But I'll let Tyler come in on that.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Lawson, for your questions. I'll take the one on the redundancy policy first. I had a meeting had a chat with Unison this week, their regional organiser as well as their local organiser. That's something they've raised with me. That is something I'm taking away and raising that with through the council as well. In terms of the sort of the post-16 transport, you raise an individual case there, and again I go back to my comment about it going through the appeals process, and if you would like to forward that resident's contact details on to myself, more than happy to send them the information to guide them into that process, because there's about, I think if I'm getting my figures right here, I think there's about 300 post-16 students who are helping with it or have been helping with their home to school transport, and if the decision that has been come, some of them we have had feedback from some that this has been a useful thing for them to give them some independence, but we're aware as well that more often than not it is going to impact them greatly. If we feel that, you know, there is a case there that needs looking at, do encourage them down the appeals process. It's what it's there for.
They've already been rejected at the first stage appeal. That's why I actually raised the case. It will obviously now go to an appeals panel. Thank you.
Right. Right. Thank you. I think things of more of an individual nature will have to be taken up in a different arena, perhaps, because there are important points to be made there that you've got to make, but I don't think all of them are relevant for scrutiny at this time.
Apologies, Chair. I just felt that when it was stated that cases are being heard on an individual basis, that they perhaps weren't, that there seemed to be a more blanket approach.
I understand.
Given what my resident had been through and the first stage being rejected.
Appreciate it. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you to the members for their presentations, really informative and useful. A couple of comments and questions. Firstly, to the leader, again, really appreciate seeing your priorities, which I'm sure we'll all agree are all of our priorities, and they're just a movement from the previous administration, so it's refreshing to see that. Your comment around, it was great to see that you're engaging in partnership working, particularly cross-party. I'd actually welcome seeing some further details of how that's going to be implemented, and I'd actually like to see it extended in all areas of the priorities that you have for as leadership, and I'd like to see some more sort of meat on the bones, so to speak, in terms of how you're going to reach out with the different parties. As we say, we've got a number of different parties, and it'd be useful to see some more collaborative working, so I'd like to see that as part of your plan. The other question I've got is around, and I think Councillor Turner commented on it, around the capital investment, and Councillor Patterson also alluded to it, the fact that the whole of Kirklees is going to be impacted. I think residents currently sometimes feel, and in the past historically have felt, that Huddersfield has taken the vast majority of that investment. I'd like to again see how that's been evaluated and measured in terms of distribution of capital funds. So, for example, in Dewsbury, again, I've sadly seen the decline of Dewsbury Town Centre, living in Dewsbury, and I hear it from residents. So, again, the schemes that we've got in place, the regeneration of the arcade are all welcome, and it's great to see them coming along. The development on Riverside, again, great to see. But I'd like to know a bit more detail around the community shared sort of shopping centre that's in development. I mean, as a resident, so not as a councillor, as a resident myself, I've not had a lot of information or been part of that consultation sort of period. So I'd like to see a bit more detail on how that was formulated, rolled out, consulted on, and, the plans moving forward. And then it'd be remiss of me, and I don't want to repeat what Councillor Lawson and Councillor Green have said, but as Chair of Children's Services, post-16 transport is massive. It's the one thing that I've got numerous cases, deputations, presentations, so it'd be remiss of me not to mention the importance of it, and I do appreciate that it is a tough decision that you've had to make. What I would like to see is, again, further I suppose, thought and consideration for those individual case-by-case basis. And also, what kind of options were explored prior to making that decision with regards to, savings that could have been made at other transport, so not just the post-16, but the under-16s. Were those options explored? I'm sure they probably were, but, I think residents and parents in particular of children that have got specialist needs would appreciate some kind of report or information on how that decision was brought about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Oh dear, I can't get rid of this croak. Partnership working. I mean, obviously, yes, as I said, I want to do it. I would like to see it happening more on a cross-party basis, but it also does extend to working with the university, working with different cultural organisations in the town, working with the voluntary sector, etc., etc. In terms of meat on the bones, particularly within the council processes, etc. I mean, we have already established. Well, at the moment, to a certain extent, it's happening more at the level of leaders of the different parties, and we have got the budget working group, but of leaders of all of the parties of the council. But there will be other issues that we'll want to extend information and that cross-party working on. things like the Constitution, just looking at the Constitution, we'll be looking at that on a cross-party basis as well. But also, I think we're working not just at that level of leaders, we're working to really involve ward members, again, across the piece, in more of the decisions that we need to make pre-making any decision. So, I mean, there's a lot more meat on the bone to come, but that's where we are at the moment. Thank you.
Can I just come back to that? That's really refreshing to see, again, and I really welcome that. I'd just like to add to your point there, in terms of ward members, if you look across that chamber and across parties, so excluding leaders, I think there's a lot of talent in different fields and different things. So I would really appeal to you to utilise that channel, that talent that we've got out there, and reach out to individual members on a consultative basis to advise on what their, speciality is.
Yes, I would agree.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, that's all we've got time for today. So I'd like to thank the Leader of the Council, portfolio holders, for coming, for outlining the priorities. We note the priorities. There may be some of those priorities that we will come back on in the near future to go through again, but thank you for your attendance. Thank you. Item 8, Council Plan and Performance Update Quarter 1. This is a brief presentation of the report that went to Cabinet on 13th of August.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. The Quarter 1 24-25 Council Plan and Performance Update Report is the first iteration of a new quarterly report, providing an update on progress against the 24-25 Council Plan priorities and an update against the Council's key measures for 24-25 financial year. The first section of the report provides details on Council activity and delivery against the 4 priorities within the Council Plan. And the second section of the report provides the latest data against the Council's key measures for 24-25 and shows a range of improvements and challenges. Those improvements and challenges are reflected in the charts on page 16 of the report, summarising the direction of travel across both demand and performance measures. For future iterations of the report, we will be looking to include benchmarking data against the key measures where this is available, and that will help contextualise the demand and performance trends and enable members to compare performance and demand in Kirklees with regional and national rates. So I'd welcome feedback from members of the committee on the format of the new report and how potential developments we can look at for future iterations. Thank you.
Any comments or questions from the committee? No? Okay. In that case, I'd like to thank you for your attendance, and we note that the regular reports will be submitted to the committee on a regular basis throughout the rest of the year. So thank you for your attendance and update. Item 9, Corporate Financial Monitoring Update Quarter 1. This will be a brief presentation of the report that went to Cabinet 13th of August. Kevin? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I shall just share my screen. I've summarised the report into a few slides for ease, trying to pick out the highlights of each area of overspend. So at Quarter 1 in the General Fund, we're projecting a 3.5% or 12.9 million overspend. The Council has total usable reserves of 60.5 million, of which unallocated reserves are 25. And 15 million is the assessed minimum level, and other earmarked reserves are 35.5 million. The table there shows the breakdown of the 12.9 million projected overspend across each directorate, which, as you can see on the right-hand side, initially adds up to just over 18 million, and we've got various contingencies and reserves that we're going to use to bring down the figure to 12.9 million. I just thought I'd just talk members through some of the individual directorate pressures. At the high level there, we can see that of the 18 million, about 8.5 million relates to slippage in specific savings that were budgeted for this year, and there's 9.6 million of new pressures. So the key pressures that this council's facing and councils across the country are facing within children and families, primarily looked after children costs, around 4.5 million pressures. That's the demand and complexity and the inflationary pressures that this service face, and then there's 500,000 within staffing for additional educational psychologists. Adults, there's a £2 million pressure, mainly around demand-led pressures, 1.7 million, and some income pressures around the targets set for debt collection within CFA, but they're being offset by staffing savings and communities down to 2 million. Variations in Place Directorate, as members will appreciate, it's quite a varied directorate, so there's a number of variations. Within Waste, we've got disposal cost pressures of 1.3 million, and we've got vehicle hire pressures of 1 million. There are plans to address that latter point specifically around investment in new vehicles that are in the capital plan, and a report will be brought forward shortly. Parking, 1.6 million short, projected at Q1. That's mainly the review or pause pending a further review of residence permits and district parking charges. Corporate landlord pressures over 1 million around management of maintenance of buildings, including the effects of some slippage in disposals, and transport, maintenance and repairs of vehicles, sort of linked to the waste one really. We have got some ageing fleet vehicles. And then in public health and corporate, arguably the biggest single line, along with looked after children, is the housing benefit subsidy loss from the costs of providing bed and breakfast and temporary accommodation. That is 4.4 million above a budget that we have of 2.6 million. So it's actually costing around 7 million of council money, that subsidy loss. And there are compensating savings, particularly within sort of the traditional support services of 0.7 million. So what's next for 24/5 for the general fund is I've asked all exec directors in conjunction with the portfolio leads to bring forward savings proposals to close that £12.9 million gap. There's an ongoing review of the capital plan to target further savings in capital financing costs, and there's a couple more slides on capital. We need to ensure the council maximises its grant income opportunities, so making sure we charge all appropriate costs to grants, and that should include management and overheads where permissible, and the continuing tight control of spend and recruitment. On the HRA, that is projecting, I probably need to summarise that better next time for Q2. The actual overspend is 4.8 million, and we are using 4.4 million of reserves. The big figure in there, the variation on HRA comes under other, relates to the amount of money we need to set aside to go into the HRA capital plan from sorry, I'm slide too far. On the spend bullet points there was a review of the calculation of depreciation, which is used to fund the capital plan, and that's cost an additional 4 million. So that will go in to fund future capital expenditure. But because that came after the budget was set, I'll need to fund that from the major repairs reserve in the first instance until we can get the budgets realigned in future. On capital, at council in, I think it was July, we agreed a rollover plan of 340 million. Since then, we've started the review of the capital plan. We haven't taken anything out of the capital plan, but we've done some slippage in Q1 to reflect where services think they are with their capital plan. So we're down at £278 million for the capital plan which is a 62 million slippage so far into future years. And at that figure, around 278 million, the overall capital financing budget for the general fund is balanced. So we've got enough slippage to balance this year's budget, but to make further savings, we need to probably slip more. So we've slipped 62 million, but just wanted to give members a bit of context of where that all falls, really. A lot of the slippage is council borrowing, so that's a 23 million, and that does give us the ability to balance the capital financing budget. But there are other slippages around grant-funded schemes of 22 million. Doesn't really have an impact on the Treasury budget. There's cash flow impacts, but not significant debt savings. So that we will continue that review. And I think my final slide is on the DSG, but particularly the high needs block. And the big issue here is the safety valve. The high needs block's in deficit at 43 million at the end of the year, and we're looking like it's going to overspend somewhere between 7 and 11 million. So that deficit will rise this year. The plan is there was an agreed plan that the deficit would be cleared by 2030. I think that's challenging at this stage, and it will depend on some of the things that Councillor Turner referenced about the special schools coming on board. So we've got those in the capital programme, and that will allow us to bring some children back into the borough, costing us a lot of money. And I think, that's it for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Are there any comments or questions from the panel? Councillor Cooper.
I'm just wondering about capacity within the organisation, and when we're looking at achieving savings, when we're looking about generating new income and the opportunities that are available. I know there are staffing issues in lots of services. Housing, particularly, is a big one. Corporate landlord, all sorts of areas where we've got staffing issues. Which I'm just wondering if there's been any assessment made of the impact of staff shortages on our ability to deliver our objectives, savings and opportunities.
So on your staffing question, there is a tight control on recruitment. There is a panel that approves all the recruitment, so it feeds up from individual service directorates through to a sort of a corporate panel that I and others sit on, and we do release posts that we consider essential for service delivery that would be income generating, but obviously we have to try and hold the line on certain other posts because of the 12.9 million pressure that I've indicated there. The second, or your first point about capacity, we do have transformation budgets that we used to support services through transformation, so we've got a reserve for that which will be probably fully utilised this year. And when I come on to the next presentation about the medium-term position, there is an assumption that I replenish that reserve to make sure that there is capacity to continue to deliver service change.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
I just want to add to follow up on Kevin's point about capacity. It is a challenge in most parts of the organisation. Certainly in the areas I deal with, we're desperately short of, I think I mentioned it on Wednesday, planners. We can't get enough planners. We're struggling in corporate landlord, and everybody in there is doing their absolute most dedicated time to delivering for residents and working the socks off. But there's just not enough of them. And it would seem a little bit counterintuitive to get someone to try and work out how that impact is, because that'll take them away from the day job. So, plus I don't know quite how you do that. So I don't think we can honestly say how it impacts. We know it impacts, but quite how it's probably difficult to tell because it affects so many parts of the organisation. I can clear in corporate landlord we should have sold more assets by now, but we haven't. It takes us time because we haven't got enough people. That's why it's taken us a little bit longer than we would have anticipated. But we will get there, but it's just time consuming with not enough people. But how you analyse it, really challenging to say. Does it make sense to take someone off a day job to find out why we're not doing the day job? You know what I mean?
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay. We'll move on. Okay, thank you very much, Kevin, for that. And we know that there'll be reports submitted on a regular basis. We'll move on to item 10, medium-term financial strategy. Kevin again.
Thank you, Councillor. Again, I've got to have another short presentation on the strategy assumptions that were considered at Cabinet and then Council earlier this week. So on the principles of the medium-term financial strategy, what we're trying to do as an organisation is trying to reduce the reliance of one-off funding for recurring spend and try to get the base budget to reflect the reality of the current cost of service provision. So the ways we do that is we take a greater recognition of the existing demand pressures that we've seen and that I've just described in the previous presentation. We make appropriate provision for pay and price inflation, and we recognise the impacts of legislative changes. So within waste, the pressures around landfill tax and POPs, for example. We'll replenish reserves for transformation, as I just described, and we've also given a commitment as part of the DFE safety valve agreement that this council will put in £10 million towards that agreement with the DFE, and that will go in at £2 million a year. We talked about the capital plan being reviewed, so we just need to make sure that's affordable, because the costs of the capital plan in revenue terms are just like any other pressure. Compare it to children, housing subsidy loss. If we have a huge capital plan, that's unaffordable. We have a greater revenue need. On the capital plan, we will add new schemes if they are deemed to be a greater priority than existing schemes. But all that comes at a cost, if you like. If you get your base more sustainable, knowing that there's not too much more in terms of additional funding from government, the gap grows and therefore there are more savings to find. So the funding assumptions that have gone into the plan, and obviously they're all contained in the report. We've assumed council tax will be going up by 4.99%. We've assumed a tax base growth increase, circa 800 properties per annum, and the current ultimate council tax and business rates collection percentages, as you see there, which are in line with most other West Yorkshire districts. We've assumed the settlement funding is an uplift of 2%. That may be a risk, given some of the statements coming out from the Chancellor. But in this plan, we haven't made any assumption around the impact of any fair funding review. So we haven't assumed the pie will be greater, and we haven't assumed Kirklees will get a greater share of an existing pie. We won't know that from this budget. The government have committed to do a review of a multi-year settlement in the spring of next year. So I just wanted to make that point clear. So this slide just summarises how we've got to a £29 million gap. So we start at 363 million. There's some one-off savings we're adding back in, so you rebase to 366. So pay and inflation pressures across the directorate's 18 million. We've budgeted for 3% pay award next year. 1% costs 2.5 million, very broadly. So we've assumed 3. That's obviously not our decision. It's a national decision agreed by the employers and the unions. Demand pressures, 16 million, pretty much in children's and adults directorates, reflecting pressures that we've seen across this year. The other pressures figure, it's quite a big figure there, but there's 2 items that are driving that. There's these housing subsidy loss, which is in at currently in, I think, 4.6 million. And then there's significant capital financing costs, probably around 10 million extra, based on the existing capital programme. There's a couple of million of other funding changes that will change, and members may remember there was significant savings approved for 25-26 as part of the 24-25 budget. So this plan assumes that services and directorates will be on target to deliver those agreed savings. That gives you 400 million. We estimate that total funding available next year, taking into account council tax rise, council tax base growth, and settlement funding, will be 371 million, leaving that gap of 29 million. And at that point, this is then back to directorates to bring forward savings proposals. What I have said to the exec directors is that that 29 million can come a number of ways. They can bring forward specific savings proposals, which may involve changing service delivery. However, they should also go and review all of those pressures above, particularly demand, and I'll be having a look at the funding side as well. If there's more up-to-date information which suggests those demand pressures may not be as high, we can reduce those down as a mechanism of reducing the £29 million gap. But like all councils, it's very challenging, the scale of this figure. We're not unique, as Councillor Turner's previously indicated. That's it, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for the presentation. Another difficult one. Any comments or questions at this time from panel members? Councillor Cooper?
Just a quick one. Usually in November, December, we get figures from government. So those may change a bit if government. So that's the time we should probably review this.
Yes, you're correct, Councillor Cooper. The first thing we'll see is the Chancellor's budget on the 30th of October, which will give an indication at sector-wide level, so not down to a local authority level. So we can make some assumptions around what comes out of the budget on the 30th of October, which would change those figures up or down. I don't know. And then we get the provisional settlement probably the week before Christmas, typically. And then final settlement in February. The government also do tend to announce grant separately, so we'll get notification of adult social care grants and other grants at various timescales during that period as well. So we'll keep all that under review.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you for your presentations. We know that you will be submitting further reports to the committee on a regular basis. Item 11, Corporate Risk, Quarter 1. We receive a brief presentation of the report that went to Cabinet on 13th of August. Alice.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. For those of you familiar with the Corporate Risk Report, you'll note that this is a new format which aims to provide a summary of the key risks that the organisation is facing, whilst providing sufficient content and detail to give assurance or otherwise on risk mitigations that are in place. The report format supports a more robust and rigorous approach to risk management that we're seeking to embed across the Council. Each of the risks included within the report has its own slide. The 5x5 grid that's in the top right corner provides an indication of the current and previous quarter risk score and also the target risk score. The target risk reflects both our ability as an organisation to really move the dial on some of these risks, as well as introducing the concept that for some risks we'll have a greater risk tolerance than we do for others. The bottom left quadrant on the slide details controls that are in operation. So these are embedded processes that operate on an enduring basis, and it's expected that the performance of these controls is monitored by the first line. The bottom right quadrant details additional actions that are underway. These may be more short-term interventions and reactive in nature, and it's expected that these actions have a delivery date, and that's closely tracked and monitored. We're just starting the process of collating the quarter 2 report, so feedback on the structure of the report is welcome to ensure that we can capture that. And in terms of content, it's worth reiterating that this is the Q1 report, and as such, there are certain recent risk factors that will not be visible in this report, but will of course be referenced in the Q2 one. I'm happy to take any questions on the report, on the content or the structure. However, as always, just to say, if it's to do with the management of specific risks, it will be the risk owner as the appropriate person to address those rather than myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from panel members? No? Okay, thank you very much. So we know these reports will be submitted to the committee on a regular basis throughout the rest of the year, and lead members will pick up on any items within their area of interest that require further scrutiny. Thank you very much. Item 12, Libraries Revised Delivery Model. The committee will receive a presentation in respect to the revised Libraries Delivery Model, an upcoming consultation with reference to the report submitted to Cabinet on the 10th of September. This will include the proposals for engaging scrutiny and forthcoming decisions. Mags.
Thank you. The slides are on my screen, so they should be loading in a second, hopefully. There we go. So today is really just to provide an update on the paper that was taken to Cabinet in September to discuss the findings of the informal consultation which took place prior to returning to Cabinet, to update on the proposed future delivery model for the library service, to provide an update on the consultation which is planned, and to propose engagement with scrutiny moving forward. So in the paper that was taken to Cabinet, they were asked to and did approve a revised targeted libraries delivery model, which set to retain some paid staffed hours across all 24 library locations. This was following feedback from community engagement, and this is set to run alongside a library service management and staffing review, which allow the required savings to be achieved. They were asked to endorse the consultation process and the option of the targeted reduction in staffed hours and potential opening hours that will seek community and partner input through surveys and focus groups, as well as to ensure the proposed model meets the legal requirements for a comprehensive and efficient service, as also meeting the needs for to support our community. They were asked to note the integrated impact assessment that will be reviewed throughout the process, and for us to return to Cabinet for consideration of a future model following consultation prior to any implementation. So prior to returning back to Cabinet, we contacted all of the 24 libraries with an offer of engagement. There was target engagement completed at 8 of our locations, which were proposed originally to become community managed library locations. We engaged with friends of groups, trustees, building owners, ward and parish and town councillors. We provided detailed information on the proposal, gave opportunities for questions, listened to feedback and concerns, collated any key themes, evaluated the feedback, and then utilised that feedback to support the development of draft principles when looking at a targeted reduction across the library estate. So the outcome of that informal engagement led to a couple of key themes. All locations wanted to remain part of our library service, which would mean them remaining on the statutory network. There was lots of discussions around reducing Kirklees paid staff in these locations or other locations rather than removing staff from locations fully. Concerns were raised over the ageing volunteers who currently support our library service, a lack of volunteer capacity to deliver the proposed community managed model, a risk of losing volunteers should they be asked to deliver a community managed model. Locations raised concerns around becoming less inclusive, and a reduction in lack of skills around safeguarding and GDPR. The feedback attained from the informal engagement has now informed our updated needs assessments, a revised draft library strategy, and an alternative option for consideration in response to the feedback received, which is the model considered by Cabinet. So put forward in the revised model was the targeted reduction in staffed hours across all 24 locations. So this targeted reduction in hours and some opening hours in some locations. And I think it's important to note that just because there is a reduction in staffed hours doesn't necessarily mean that there is a reduction in opening hours. Some locations have multiple staff, so we might be able to reduce staffed hours without altering opening times. Staffed hours will be based on assessed needs and a model of delivery across the whole of the library footprint, making sure that all our libraries are retained within our statutory network. All libraries will retain some paid staff support. We'll ensure that to retain increased support in areas of assessed need, so areas of deprivation. Right-sizing the library's management structure to reflect an updated proposal, ensuring appropriate capacity for management support. And we'll continue to build on our existing community capacity, ensuring to support our existing library volunteers who are vital to the running of our library service, and to also support the development of new volunteers and new volunteering opportunities. So within the draft new libraries strategy, it's key that we're able to deliver a comprehensive and efficient library service as required by DCMS. And we would need to, and we can deliver the following: access to reading, book stock and the circulation of that stock, access to information within our library locations and online, digital inclusion, and encouraging the use of services. In Kirklees, we also want to prioritise and be able to deliver our safe and warm spaces, our libraries of sanctuary offer, school readingness and literacy development, access to culture and creativity, community inclusion, business support and skills development, a wellbeing focus on social connectivity, particularly around the loneliness and isolation agenda, increasing focus on external funding, so grants which might be able to support our future delivery. So where might we see some changes? So there'll be a decrease in staff-led community outreach, and there's an opportunity for volunteers and partners to be explored to support the delivery of this moving forward, and a reduction in staff-led events, and again, an opportunity for this to be supported by volunteers moving forward. So in terms of the public consultation that was agreed, it was agreed that this would be run over a minimum of 8 weeks. Public will be actively engaged to complete either an online or a paper-based survey, and that's open to everybody, whether they are library or non-library users. There will be an opportunity throughout the consultation period for an engagement with communities and partners through focus groups, and these will include our ward councillors, our key stakeholders. Communication will be consistent and timely throughout the consultation period. And then following the formal 8-week consultation, the library service will revisit the needs assessment and update as appropriate, evaluate the consultation findings, draft final proposals to be considered by DCMS and then Cabinet, and then plan for the implementation following a final Cabinet decision. The Library Service are really keen to engage with Scrutiny throughout this process, and we'd like to return to provide an update on the public consultation and seek Scrutiny's views prior to the consultation going live. We'd like to hold a workshop with Scrutiny members to present early findings of the consultation, discuss any proposed implications, and consult on the future delivery model prior to it being presented back to Cabinet. We'd then like to return to Scrutiny to provide an update on the final Cabinet decision and present the future model and their implementation plans. So just to clarify in terms of next steps, to return to seek views on the consultation with Scrutiny prior to going live, to commence the public consultation, to hold a Scrutiny workshop with early findings prior to returning to Cabinet, to take a final proposal back to Cabinet for consultation of the new proposed library delivery model, and then to attend Scrutiny following final Cabinet decision to update on implementation plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and going through the model and the consultation that will be upcoming. I think I and the rest of the committee are really positive about the involvement the scrutiny will have, and that we appreciate the involvement and being part of that process so that we can add value to that going forward as well with the timeline that you have provided us with. So we appreciate that, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation there. I just wanted to add to what's already been said that this isn't unique to Kirklees. This is happening throughout, and that actually 180 run councils have been shut down or have been passed on to voluntary groups to run since 2016. And Kirklees Council, we're one of the largest sizable council libraries, number of council libraries in West Yorkshire, second to Leeds. In respect of our 24 libraries, 838,000 visitors have been to our libraries. 860,000 issues have been dealt with at our libraries. 72,000 IT sessions have taken place. 7,000 events and nearly 12,000 new members since 2022-2023. And I just really wanted to take this opportunity to thank our volunteers for the fantastic work that they do in our libraries, because without them we would really struggle to do and maintain what we've got so far. We know libraries are not just a place for books, they're a place for their community hubs, community spaces, wellbeing centres. They combat loneliness. A little bit later on, we'll be talking about loneliness and isolation, and also warm spaces. So it's even more important that we try and keep this service going, and we support volunteers to support us going forward. So I think that's all I really want to say at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Pinnock. So we're moving on to, that was just for information and the process involved. Item 13, Government Policy Legislation Horizon Scanning. So the committee will be updated in respect of expected changes to government policy and or legislation relevant to local government. I think Rachel is going to go through this briefly.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that Overview Scrutiny Management Committee have received a document that provides that ongoing overview of government policy and legislation. This was something that the committee asked for during the planning workshop, and the idea is that it's based on the government's manifesto and announcements since the election. We're trying to focus it specifically on policy and legislation related to local government, and particularly the work plan for Overview Scrutiny Management Committee, although obviously I recognise that within your own committees there'll be areas that you might want to dig deeper into. At the moment, there's limited detail behind quite a lot of the headlines that you've got in that document, particularly because of the autumn statement coming up. But if there's any further information on any of the areas that are listed in the document that you'd like us to do some work on, we can take that away and do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Councillor Cooper.
So on Tuesday, the consultation closes on the proposals for the National Planning Policy Framework. It seems to have very low visibility among members. We've not debated it at council. I don't know if Kirklees is submitting a response or not, because there's huge implications for Kirklees in terms of staffing for planning, or the money that we will get from housing, all sorts of things that stem from that, and an assumption that somehow or other giving a bigger target will result in more houses, which is probably nonsense. But how come so little visibility, and are we actually providing a response from Kirklees?
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. I will take that away and find out for you. I don't know the answer at the moment.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? So we've received the document with the headlines on there, so we'll go through that again and highlight any areas that would be of particular interest to this committee or to the panel leads. Thank you. Item 14, Scrutiny of Social Connectivity in Kirklees, Final Report Action Plan. So this report is to conclude the scrutiny work undertaken in relation to social connectivity in Kirklees and the response from the Cabinet Member for Education and Communities to the committee's recommendations. Sheila.
Yeah, just to
to explain that in 2022-23, the committee commenced scrutiny in respect of the issue of social connectivity in Kirklees. This included consultation with a range of partners and interested parties. The work resulted in the production of this final report, including 10 recommendations covering 8 areas of focus earlier this year. That report was shared with the Cabinet member, and her response to the recommendations is appended to the report.
Yeah,
Councillor Pinnock. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say a few things. So obviously as a new Cabinet member, I really welcome this comprehensive report, which focuses on levels of loneliness, isolation, the root causes and the recommendations to address the issues. The report indicates that there is a strong link between loneliness and deprivation. There's also issues in relation to low income, people with disabilities, people with mental health, young people, just to name a few things. And it's come as no surprise that COVID-19 has exacerbated loneliness and isolation. So this report is particularly important and very timely, in my opinion. A little bit earlier on, we talked about libraries being maintained and the importance of having those community spaces, those community hubs, for people to come together to combat things like isolation and loneliness. This piece of work, as we heard, was commissioned by Scrutiny in 2022. I value it, and I know the service values the information that's been provided. This work has obviously identified areas now that the Council needs to address, and we need to ensure that there's adequate provision in place to support residents who need the help, not just from the Council, but also community partners and other services. So I personally welcome this. I accept the recommendations of the report, and as portfolio holder during my tenure, I endeavour to ensure that this work in particular continues. I'd like to thank members of the Scrutiny, past and present, along with officers and community partners for playing their part in getting this particular report done and shaping this report. And we will continue all to monitor things going forward for the future.
Thank you, Councillor Pinnock. I believe Councillor Smage would like to comment.
I would, thank you. So this work was undertaken obviously when I was Chair of Scrutiny. The aim of the work was to hopefully make sure our recommendations could assist in reducing loneliness and isolation in Kirklees. And I want to thank everyone who spoke to us, and officers and committee who worked on this. The common themes that have been identified are on pages 28 to 31 of the report, so I'm not going to go through those, but I just want to highlight some of the recommendations, please. So at page 32 of the report, the recommendations commence. And what we're saying is that the shift, the framing should shift from loneliness towards social connectivity. There is a perceived stigma in talking about being lonely. And when we asked how to make loneliness everyone's business, everyone had a difficulty to answer that question. And so we're saying it would be of benefit to reframe this discussion. On recommendation 2, what we're saying is there needs to be wider rollout of conversations guidance document and the provision of specific skills in testing. It's got to be a continuing priority for the Council and the partners, particularly in light of people's the impact on people's physical and mental health. In times of reduced funding, it is easy to concentrate on the acute need because that's what we have to provide for, and rightly so. But we also need to look at prevention, because that will help with residents' health and well-being, but in time it will also help with the Council with their finances. And it is really important that such things such as social isolation and loneliness are part of that prevention discussion. The recommendation 5, we talked about ward councillors and how they can input into this. And we also, at recommendation 6, we talked about a provision of information at the earliest possible time. We heard that from people that if you get a diagnosis of an illness, then that in itself can take some coming to terms with. And you don't necessarily at that time think about any support groups, etc. But you might need support groups to help you come to terms. Or you might want to engage with a support group later on. But how do you know that one is there if you haven't been given that information as part of those conversations? We also talked about discussion with schools and colleges, because this is something that affects young and old alike. And we talked about activities and groups that through information being given through trusted sources. And we also talked about befriending services and the need for them to continue. And also possibilities and potential for provision of crisis assistance for those who may be suffering an impact on their mental health associated with a lack of social connections. Can I thank the Cabinet member for the response to the recommendations on the action plan. We talked about this being something that needs emphasis across the council, and all the actions, or the majority of actions, are down for public health and communities and ICB. It obviously comes under their remit, but we're talking about across the council as well. There needs to be awareness, there needs to be understanding of the impacts of the lack of social across the whole council. So for instance, if you're looking at the integrated impact assessment for something that has been discussed earlier on, which was the post-16 transport, then you don't find anything in there necessarily that talks about the potential of losing social connectivity because a young person is not able to attend the education that they were hoping to because of costs. And so it is something that loneliness and social connectivity need to be considered as part of what the council is discussing. We also, on the action plan, that people are talking about work that is ongoing at the moment, but what we're asking for is for that to be looked at and adapted and changed. Not everybody has online capabilities, and that in itself can either bring more isolation, but being online and not connecting with people also brings isolation. And so the council needs to consider how it interacts with residents across the borough. I think that's all I wanted to say on the recommendations. I would hope that Scrutiny would look at the action plan and follow up on the recommendations on a regular basis. This is an important piece of work that a lot of people have inputted into, and I want to thank everybody for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smidge. Appreciate your comments and your work on that. Any comments or questions from committee members? Councillor Cooper.
Good report, and really pleased to see this. I think I've seen it in various iterations as we've gone along. On the councillor role, there's a specific mention of ward budgets, which are, of course, incredibly limited these days and probably going to be clawed back at some point or other. If last year was anything to go by. It would be, I suppose, really, it would be good to get some guidance really about how's that, and maybe some specific funding. I know that was dedicated to this area of use of budgets. I also think there's something about councillors' wider community leadership role in bringing people together, and their role in developing community vibrancy. When I talk about community vibrancy, I think, you know, a timetable of stuff. Is there lots of stuff going on in the patch that you represent? Are there events and things where all people can turn up to? And I know it mentions later on about open access activities. But councils can have a big role in making sure those things happen and occur. And happen and occurs are the same thing, isn't it? Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Any other comments, questions from committee members? Not. Councillor Pinnock, would you like to respond to some of the points that have been raised, particularly around the role of the councillors and ward budgets in connection to this?
I'm happy to do that. So thank you, Councillor Smage. I totally agree with what you're saying. Early intervention and prevention is the key in respect of loneliness and isolation. We need to be able to identify those issues early so that we can tackle them early. And obviously we need the framework in place for that to happen. And a good starting point is obviously raising awareness. And you talked about councillors, the role of councillors, the fact that we are uniquely positioned to be able to do those things. You know, in terms of supporting organised groups doing this type of work, signposting people who are suffering from loneliness and isolation, identifying where the gaps are. We know our wards. We know what community groups are out there, what we should do. Where are those gaps? And once we've identified the gaps, you know, making sure there is provision in place for people who are affected, and obviously being a voice for the voiceless. So we do have a unique role. Councillor Cooper, I agree. Ward budgets, you know, as things stand at the moment, we don't know, you know, whether that's going to be scaled back, and if it is, to what extent. That information will come to light, I'm sure, at some point. But specific funding dedicated in this area is certainly something that needs to be considered, and I will certainly consider it as to, you know, what we need, how much funding we need, and more importantly, it's not just about what the council can provide, it's also about community partners, it's about other institutes. What's the NHS doing? You know, what are schools doing? What are other partners doing? We need to be working together collaboratively. And there's no point in things happening with the council, but something similar happening with the NHS, for example. We need to make sure we're working together, it's streamlined, and that the people who are affected get the best service, get the best provision. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Councillor Smage, for your part, and Councillor Pinnock. This is really positive, and it's just kind of a suggestion, really. Looking at point 8, I do feel that the loneliness needs to be tackled at a younger age, as young as possible, to give the children that much confidence, so they later on in life they've got those skills. I've noticed on there it's recommending a college or a school newsletter, and I would just like to kind of maybe suggest that is produced by the children rather than the school, because that way, if they've got that involvement at an early age, they can develop those skills and that interaction. Say, for example, they're interviewing a teacher or they're interviewing a counsellor or whoever, so they've got that input into that newsletter. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? No? So, thank you for everybody's involvement who's been involved with this. Officers, panel members who've done, we welcome the positive responses to the committee's recommendations as set out in the action plan and endorsed by the Cabinet member. And perhaps we can look a little bit further around the role of the council or budgets, and, you know, if there was a certain amount of budgets that would be earmarked for loneliness and that as well. There's something that we could talk about again and discuss, which would be useful to further enhance the work that already takes place and to encourage that joined up working as well. Okay. Thank you. Item 15, Overview Scrutiny Management Committee Work Programme for 24-25. Any comments or anything needs to be raised by any committee members? No? That's fine. Thank you very much. Any other business? No any other business? So thank you everybody for your attendance today, all the contributions and the help and support. Next meeting is the 1st of November. Thank you very much.